Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast. I'm your host, Byron Greeley, and today's guest is Sydney Sam, the founder of Workspace Global. Workspace Global used to be a traditional creative agency, but it has changed and developed over time to become a productized service that is designed to support small businesses with creative services. In our conversation, we discuss how Workspace Global's subscription model works, how the business started, how Africa is being poised to be a major player in the global workspace, the future of business, and the Ikigai concept, and how setting a clear North Star can help prioritize personal and professional goals. It's a really interesting conversation, and Sydney provides some valuable advice that's actionable and I think can go a long way. I think you'll enjoy this one. I know I did. Enjoy the show. Hey Sydney, thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited to get into it. To start us off, could you give us a rundown of what Workspace Global is and how it all works?
Hi, Brian. I'm very excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this podcast for some time and very keen to see what your audience and your listeners are into. It would be really nice to get feedback from that perspective. But just to kick off, I am an entrepreneur. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for about 13 years. And I am currently leading the business called Workspace Global, which is a design studio reimagined as a SaaS. Okay, so think about it. We're trying to make it as easy for people to just subscribe to access a creative or design team like you would do for Netflix. The beautiful offer is you can make as many requests as you want endlessly. We deliver almost everything in 3 days, and we can do a whole bunch of stuff: websites, designs, documents, etc., and it makes it much easier to build your business or build a brand or grow your marketing better than having an agency or having working with a freelancer or having in-house teams or doing the design yourself. So that's kind of what we're solving. Yeah.
Awesome. And am I right in saying that the business was originally an agency? Is that correct?
Yes, it was. It definitely was.
And what caused you guys to make the change to this type of model?
All right. So the agency kicked off back in 2015 in Ghana, West Africa, where I'm originally from. We started out primarily to support small businesses. As my first business failed, which is what got me into branding to help other people who were running small businesses. Now, one thing led to another, and our name got pretty big. We became the intersection for global businesses coming to Africa generally. And so our prices started to get higher and higher, and we kept serving these businesses, without kind of excluding other the smaller businesses for which we set out to support. Now, what happens in the agency space is that your business starts to grow. So we had 30 full-time people, and you therefore almost need big clients to keep surviving, right? And during COVID, we hit a bit of a snag because a lot of people were scaling back on their marketing spend and how much they were investing into branding and creative assets. But also, we did realize that just in terms of where we started from, we had completely lost the plot of supporting small businesses. So I had kept thinking to myself, how would we be able to sustainably support small businesses in a way that gives a lot of them attention, but also be able to explode our impact instead of supporting 10, 15, 20 businesses a month? Could we support 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 a month? And that started to get me dreaming about this equation of how do we submit work, high quality work, very fast, but also to be able to create thousands of jobs on the continent of Africa, right? So support thousand entrepreneurs and small businesses and create jobs for thousands of people, right? So that's what kind of got us into that space. And we kept, brainstorming, testing different models, and that's what ended us up to where we are right now with this software-led agency type business. Yeah.
That's really interesting. You touched on it was a bit of like a transitional phase and you were testing a few different models. So like how have you found it so far? What kind of challenges did you run into during that process?
So the first thing is the world is very, or the business world is very conservative. It loves to stick to its traditional ways of doing things. And you'd be surprised that even though you might find startups and small businesses very nimble, they are very used to, okay, I know what an agency is. Why don't you send me a pitch or send me a proposal, and then I will see if I'm going to work with you, right? Whereas we're offering a service where you can make a decision in 1 minute and click a button and you have access to a team, immediately. So I can really understand what businesses like Uber and Airbnb went through at the time they were, being introduced to the market. Because as much as it is something that people need, people don't know they need it.
Yeah.
And so you have to be in the space of that first mover. You need to be able to educate the market a lot, to adopt a different way of doing things, and that had been very challenging. I mean, we launched this business probably about 2 years ago, but we're really just getting into the groove of like rapid adoption this year, right? So you can see how long it has taken to get people into the game. So that was the first thing. The second thing also is that we don't know what's going to work because there aren't that many people out there who have done it. I mean, we have a few competitors like Superside and Design Pickle and Penji who have navigated this quite well and have done this in a slightly different way. Superside, for example, is only focusing on enterprise and mid market, so their price tag is about $5,000 a month, whereas we are more at the $300 to $500 a month, right? To ensure that every entrepreneur can start a business right now and enter and work with us. Now, people then were like, if it's $500 a month, is it even good? Right. So we also started to realize that even at the price point, because we're trying to make it accessible, that also, required a lot, like had a lot of inertia in terms of people adopting that. We also started off thinking that we could work on a project to project basis. So initially it was an e-commerce model where you buy a service and you can get that service delivered for you in a couple of days. And we realized that, well, there were challenges with repeat business. Well, not necessarily repeat business, but revisions, right? So people had a lot of issues with having limited revisions, because the idea is that if we're selling time, you can't just keep working, using our time forever,
Yeah.
right? And most people were like, well, what if we're not happy? All of that stuff, right? So that has been, a lot of navigating to be able to get to this perfect point where I realize subscriptions are where it's at, because it gives the people flexibility, but also gives us a lot of flexibility to be able to serve, our market.
That's so interesting. I'm really fascinated by the education piece that you touched on.
Yeah.
How did you guys go about educating the market? What was your approach to that? Was it just putting out content and like having a detailed blog, or was it jumping on calls of people that like were landing on your page but weren't buying? Like, what was your approach?
So fundamentally, I'm an entrepreneur for entrepreneurs. So just as a founder, I have been an entrepreneurship educator for about 13 years. And that's just been everything I've been screaming about my whole life. So even though I've been running this business, what I wake up in the day to do is just to educate entrepreneurs about ways to do business better, cut back costs, just get to market, stop making mistakes, etc., etc. So I have done that by speaking a lot around the world. I've spoken a lot in the US, in the UK, in Africa, and pushing the brand. We've done a lot of podcasts. We've done a lot of webinars. And that wasn't only tied to our business at Workspace, right? That was just because that's what we want to do for impact. And so people just generally listen to us and realize, hey, um, if there's a better way to scale your marketing without, getting the overhead costs, without struggling with all of that stuff, we're listening to somebody who has told me how to better my business model, how to better my brand. Why don't I listen to these people, in terms of exactly what they're selling? So that's kind of been the way we've approached it, where we were doing this anyway, and we've done this at scale, through a lot of digital content, physical experiences, etc., etc., and then kind of steering people's attention towards the product that we have. and it just kind of fits into the message that we've always been giving. So yeah.
Interesting. And in terms of working with talent in Africa, was that because you're from Ghana and that's what you knew, or is there or are there more added benefits to sourcing your talent from Africa?
That's an interesting question. Well, there is definitely a bias because I'm from Ghana, but that is not the. I've learned not to make business decisions based on just emotions, right? And so, if you look at the statistics and the trends, you can see that the largest workforce of the future is actually from Africa because Africa has the youngest population. There's a lot of digital penetration, internet penetration. There's a lot of things that are just recently happening. So if you look at the past with the industrial revolutions and all the different revolutions that have happened, Africa is going to be at the forefront of the world's most accessible workforce, probably about 10, 20 years down the line, right? Now, it's important for businesses to strategize on that now. And we recognize in terms of affordability, in terms of access, in terms of even the ability to speak, for example, one of the most popular languages in the world, English, right? And time zones. Africa has an advantage at being the world's, best, or at least, preferred option for accessible talent. So that's kind of what drew me towards, focusing on African talent. One, to create impact for where I'm from, but two, just because the numbers show that this is where the world is going. India has had their time, and I think it's moving rapidly to Africa as the future of the world's digital workforce. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how do you guys go about sourcing your talent? Like, is there a vetting process to ensure that, like, if you turn your work around in 3 days, they have to be pretty good at what they do?
Yes, they definitely have to. So we're tackling a very tough problem. So most people think, oh, the problem is mainly with the customers, which is the businesses and the entrepreneurs. But actually, a bigger problem is with the talent. There are two types of talent. Number one, there's people who know they're good and therefore are not keen to adjust the way they work, right? So it's like, hey, I take 2 weeks to come up with a logo, and you need to pay me $5,000 to be able to get the logo, right? There's that group. And then there's a group that is very willing to be adaptable, but isn't very good at what they do.
Yeah.
So we started to understand, hey, well, this is going to be a really big challenge because number one, the biggest challenge we face is mindset. The idea that people need to understand they need to be able to work with the creative director. So as much as we're working with you, we're not just taking what you give, right? We need to be able to give you instruction, guide you to meet a certain level of quality, which the experienced creatives don't like. They're like, hey, do you know how good I am? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right. And then on top of it all, you need to deliver to me in 24 hours because it's 3 days to the customer, but it's 24 hours in house because we need to develop the brief and then we also need to do quality control before we submit. So we actually review every single thing before it goes out to the customer, right? So what we've done with our recruiting, well, I don't want to give away too much of the juice, but fundamentally, there's a very aggressive vetting process for mindset, working style, then quality. Everybody who applies meets the quality metric, through portfolio work, et cetera, et cetera. But it's more regarding the working style and the mindset, allowing yourself to be guided, allowing yourself to ask questions, to work fast. And those things are through, we do a lot of aptitude tests before they even get to the interview stage to get in. So that's just generally how that works. Yeah.
Interesting. And
Mm.
you touched on like the vetting process done by your internal team. How big is your internal team?
My internal team is a team of 7 humans. So
Oh, cool.
it's a very tiny, high performance team. We are growing quite aggressively. So we support our capacity with a fellowship program and an internship program with specific partners. But it's just 7 people who are building technology, working with hundreds of teams every day, managing hundreds of talent. It's crazy, but we love it. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. I find it so fascinating with this sort of productized service model,
Yeah.
um, that yeah, you can scale quite drastically with like a small core team and have a lot of people doing the work. It's
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah.
Um, And you touched on it a bit at the beginning, but I'd like to go a bit deeper into it. Like, how do you see the way startups and businesses are going, or how do you see that changing? How are they going to operate? How are they going to work? Do you see this being the main way they're going to operate, is using productized services like yours, or like freelancers and things like that?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Number one, it's harder and harder to get capital in different parts of the world. So a lot of people are not able to throw money at problems till they figure it out, right? They need to think lean very early. That's the first thing. Second thing is that the market is changing and shifting very quickly. So a lot of people need to be able to pivot very aggressively regarding certain things. So if you've hired, a large team for a very specific purpose and you realize, hey, I made a mistake, my thesis was wrong and I need to pivot, you start to, get a lot of burn regarding like paying for like severance packages and things like that when you have to pivot and lay off people, et cetera, et cetera. Number three, there's a lot, the markets are growing and also shrinking. So because there's a lot of, every startup or every business is competing with some form of international competitor because they have access to the market or they can play on the international stage, right? So because of that, you also need a little bit of a diverse access to a diverse workforce, right? So you can get people who can speak different languages, use AI. There's a lot of things that you want to be able to tap in instantly because you need to move very quickly. So I know that the future of business is really orienting towards like augmented teams, where these are not full-time teams. You're able to get value, switch it on and switch it off, as and when you need, scale it large or make it very small as and when you need, be able to adapt to different things as and when you need. So it's definitely where the future of business is going. And I think also on the flip side, the gig economy is growing quite aggressively, right? A lot of people are loving remote work, are loving flexible work, so you will, companies are going to start finding it much more difficult to find high quality people who are just willing to just work full time in a very specific context, right? So you also need to be a little flexible to work with, freelancers, consultants, productized services like this to be able to get value, because that way, you can access what you need very quickly without having to convince a very highly skilled professional to come to the office and do this or fly on a plane to go to, different places. So that's kind of where I'm seeing the future going. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And are you seeing the attraction to the gig economy and freelancers being more in the younger generations, or is it like across the board?
It's shifting. Of course, it's being led by the younger generation, but one thing I do recognize is that once the older generation understands, what the benefits are, a lot of people are then gravitating towards working the gig economy. So, for example, like, I mean, Uber, the age range, I don't have the data, but from my personal experience, the age range for Uber drivers is going higher and higher, right? So they're more 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds. Well, I don't know if it's 60-year-olds, but 50-year-olds are becoming Uber drivers. And when you think about that, that's a really big shift. They're all using the technology, being able to sign on to these apps, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, and people recognize that, you don't have to be unemployed, or you don't have to retire. You can apply yourself to the and get benefits in the gig economy to, stay relevant, to make some money, to keep your mind sharp. So I find that, that the spectrum is widening in terms of who the gig economy is encapsulating, and that's quite exciting to see. Yeah.
Yeah, that is exciting. And this is quite a big question, like broad question, but I'm curious, how did you like get into entrepreneurship? How did that all begin?
Ooh, so it started from big place of two things: confusion,
Hmm.
three things actually. So confusion, rebellion, but also the nervousness to make make decisions that have long-term impact immediately. So this started out back when I was in high school. So I went to high school at the age of 12, and whereas everybody else was around the age of 15. So it was quite a tough experience for me. And then so going into university at the age of 16, I didn't have a lot of I didn't fit socially in a lot of things, right? And the only thing I had going for me was the fact that I was very, very smart. But I was also a kid and I didn't know what I was doing. And I know my father had he was pushing me towards a path in, oil or economics, something more mainstream and more stable. And I know that's not what I wanted to do, but I didn't know what I wanted to do as well, right? So I decided to opt in to business school because in business school, the first year of business school, you don't have to major, you don't have to select, any specific course, right? So that's actually why. So I went into the business school with the idea that, hey, I could get some more information a year or two down the line, and then decide that I wanted to go into finance or accounting or HR, etc., etc. Learning about business got very exciting, and then I had a roommate who had a random idea to build a stand-up comedy, live music, and spoken word show. And it wasn't my idea, but I knew that I could apply myself to things, volunteer for things, and make things happen, right? So he came up with a business idea, but I was the operational element to that. And I was applying the stuff that we had in class to that, right? So that's kind of what led me into that. And just because I didn't want to commit to anything, I was rebelling against kind of, what my father wanted me to do. But then also, this was a really nice way to explore just a really random idea and get cool points, because I was a kid and like, it wasn't that easy to make friends, etc., etc. So like, this was a really cool way to start. And that's what led me to having my first business. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And so you heard this idea from your friend,
Yeah.
and I'm curious, what do you think the difference was or still is between you and him? Like, would he have ever turned this idea into a reality?
I think everyone has their strengths, and I don't think he would have turn the idea into reality in the way that I had done it, because he's a creative brain, right? His thing is to come up with very, very good ideas, very elaborate ideas, and I think there's a place for people in the world that do that. I have both an artistic brain and a scientific brain, but I need constraints to be able to thrive, right? So if there aren't constraints, if there's too much ambiguity, it's like, oh my goodness. Yeah. So I need someone to give me a hard equation and I can apply myself to that. Obviously, as I've grown, I have learned to come up with my own ideas, because I've built in maturity and stuff like that. But at that stage, he was able to give me the constraints and kind of the playground and the problem to fix. And then my mind could get going on how do we build this? Who do we need to hire? When does it need to happen? How much should we price it? Like, I love that stuff, right? So I think I may not have come up with the idea ever, right? And then he may never have taken the idea to fruition. So that mix was just a perfect blend to making it happen. And I think I just want to say this out there to anyone listening. I think it'll be good to know your place, because there are places where you can just sell your ideas. And I don't mean it in a fluffy way, right? Like, but sell elaborate ideas or help people come up with good ideas, and people are willing to pay for that. And then there's other people who are willing to go into implementation, planning, hiring, pricing, all of that stuff. And there's a whole space for that as well. So yeah.
And that was actually going to be my next question. Like, how do you make that connection? Where do you find those people like your yin to your yang?
That's a good one. I mean, I think the first thing is about knowing yourself. A lot of people haven't done the inner work to understanding what they're good at. And you'd be surprised at how much you need to dig, because sometimes you have a lot of preconceived notions. You think this is what you are and and what you'll be good at because other people have told you that's what you're good at. But you need to note that what you find valuable has first been shaped by what the people around you have found valuable. Right? So you need to first challenge that. And once you go through that self discovery, you can then recognize, hey, you know what? This is what some people find valuable, but this is what I'm good at. This is what I enjoy. And this is what I'm not good at. And therefore, this is the kind of person or kind of people that I need to interact with. There's a lot of matchmaking platforms for co-founders or partners or volunteers and stuff like that, I encourage that you leverage that, specifically those matchmaking platforms. Social media is a good thing, but then sometimes you want people who've already done the work to say, I want to start a business, and therefore I'm looking for a partner, or not just hanging out with a friend and, hey, I noticed that you're good at this and I'm good at this, so let's do something together. Because people's priorities also change in life. Some people change their priorities when they start having a family, or they go when they leave school, for example, and then you are so shocked that you thought this person was a perfect match for yourself, but then psychologically they were on a different tangent, right? So that's what I would say. Do the inner work, see where your gaps are, and then go to specific places that are, matching people who have the same long-term intent to start a business or build an NGO, start a band, for example, and then you can make the connection there. Yeah.
Do any sites come to mind? I know one for me is the Y Combinator Startup School
Yeah.
meetup site. Do you have any others off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head. And always, I mean, Complexity AI is your friend. So
Yeah.
just jump in there and then go, because there's quite a lot, and they've broken them down by geographic region. They've broken them down by by race. But there's a lot of ways by which the categorization, works. And so just do the research on Complexity, and I trust that you'll be able to find some good lists, regarding that. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And so you mentioned like you were young at university and you weren't sure what to do. Would you say that was part of what drove you to jump on that idea of your friend? Like you wanted to take action to do something, or have you always been an action taker?
Yeah, I've definitely always been. I'm always somebody who has. I have a bias to getting things done, um, but I think the openness of university was also helpful, because in university you're allowed to make mistakes and it doesn't necessarily change the entire course of your life, right? So I was like, I have absolutely no intent to do stand-up comedy and live music and spoken word for the rest of my life, but this is a great time to do it, so
Yeah.
I think a lot of people need to explore that. But to be honest, I think people should explore that anyway, no matter what stage you're at your life. The only thing is figure out how you make your money in relation to what you need to eat, and then have room to explore some of those things. And then always have a bias to action. I think the best way to learn is by breaking things and making things happen, right? I think conceptualizing a lot just leads to a lot of paralysis, and everyone is making assumptions about what the market wants. It's always a hypothesis, right? No matter how sure even if last week you had very clear data, you'd be shocked that Elon Musk could launch something today that changes the way the market feels about something, right? So it's really important to keep doing things so that you're getting like reactions and real-time data, real-time strategies, etc., to do that. And I just like that. I implement that in my marriage, in my family, in my friendships, and then also in business. Yeah.
Yeah. The reason why I started this podcast was to start taking action more, because it was just ideas and I was getting frustrated with myself. So, would
Okay.
you suggest that like breaking up a bigger problem into smaller problems is the best way to approach like getting better at taking action?
Well, yeah, yes, yes, yes. But the way I would frame it is, there's a concept that I came up with recently, which was evergreen problems. So I'll first start with the whole concept that life is about problems and struggles, and so it is actually good to chase problems, right? So there are good problems and then there are bad problems. Bad problems depress you. Good problems, inspire you, right? So you need to choose good problems, and that's something that you can take some time to think about. I always share it with people. Anytime you're not sure what you want to do in your life, ask yourself, who do you want to serve? When you figure out who you want to serve and who you enjoy serving, you can then ask, what problems do they face and which of those problems do I enjoy? Then that becomes your big evergreen problem. You don't actually ever want to solve the problem. You just want to keep working at it and getting better at, contributing to that over time. Then you break it down into, where do you start? I would always recommend you start by creating an equation which is, for example, how do I release 12 podcasts within 1 year with 12 high quality people in this very specific space? That's a nice equation. Then you can start working on what is a podcast? How do I make a podcast into a podcast? Then you can work on how do I find high quality speakers? Then you can work on how do I get it in a way that I can record 12 and do you get you know, and then you
Yeah.
can break it down and then solve it. So I like that perspective. But you need to start from the bigger, deeper, big why, and then you come down to, the individual problems. Yeah.
That's great advice. Very actionable. Um, and so Workspace Global is your fourth business, is that correct?
For business, yes.
And so what were the other two in between?
Yeah, okay, cool. So the first business was Moonlight Cafe, which was the stand-up comedy live music and spoken word event that went for 4 years. The second business was Workspace Global, but as an agency. Then that spun off to building a video production company called the Zoom Team, which did very well. It did corporate videos, documentaries around Africa. We went into South Sudan, we went into East Africa, recording videos for the UN and the World Bank.
Wow.
And then I built a nonprofit called OpenSpace, which is still running, which is honest conversations for growth for professionals around the world. We pick very touchy topics, on life, personal, business, tech, all of that stuff. And then there's Workspace, the tech business, right? So it's four brands, but you can see there's quite a few things, that have happened in between. I stopped Zoom Team because mainly video production requires physical presence, right? Which
Yeah.
is not really, it doesn't really align with my lifestyle because we travel a lot. I like to be in different places and I don't like being in places where I don't want to be. So if let's say we have a gig, in a country that I have no plans to be at, like I didn't really enjoy that. So that's why that ended. And my business partner was also settling down with his family and he couldn't be flown around the world to get stuff done. But open space and workspace are still going very strong. So yeah, those are the two
Awesome.
things that yeah.
And how do you decide whether an idea is worth pursuing?
Ooh, that's a hard one, man. Well, it depends on what you want out of it. So most people confused in terms of most people want to pursue ideas on the basis that it will make them money. And I think you need to be cautious about that in the sense where number one, if the idea is to make you money, that's great. Some people need the idea to make the money and fulfill them at the same time. That's something very hard to achieve. You can find two separate things that do that. They don't always have to be one, right? Then there's the concept of things that you're good at. So number one, it makes you money or it pays you. Number two, it fulfills you. Number three, it's something you're actually good at, and then number four, it's something that people need. So that's the general criteria that I would ask you to look at and try to find something that kind of blends two of these. This is using I think the Japanese concept of ikigai.
Yeah.
So yeah, so at least two of these are good. What most people don't want to admit is that they don't have the boundaries like for themselves to say, I will only take on a part-time gig because it is what pays me, but it's not what fulfills me. So I want to use 50% of my time to do what fulfills me and earn generally less than my full earning potential, right? But live a more balanced life. So those are the boundaries that a lot of people are struggling with. So most people will go like, I'm going to throw myself into everything that pays me and then realize, after 10 years of your life, you've just been working and you weren't very fulfilled. Some people also throw themselves entirely into just what fulfills them. And then they're always broke, and are never able to, and don't have the boundaries to be able to do a little bit of both, right? So most people just need to do the work of how many things. I think two things are usually quite good, especially because the rest of your life is obviously occupied by your family obligations and your social obligations. And if you're able to find ideas that are able to meet two, three, or all four, that's when you know that's a good idea. So yeah.
Yeah. I love the ikigai concept.
Mm.
Also with the Venn diagram, it makes it easy to sort of
Exactly.
digest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And how important is validating an idea? Like, and do you validate ideas before you start, or do you just sort of go for it?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, it's quite hard, because the world today is trying to push everyone to turn every idea into an enterprise or a venture. Not a bad thing. The world today is also trying to push everyone who has an idea to raise money, for that idea. And so most people think a good idea is only based on if a VC is going to back that idea and, things like that. So I just would like us to check some of those things very quickly, just so that you can either very independently identify if an idea is good just because of the idea and where it plays out. In terms of validating the idea, again, is the idea for you? Is it supposed to help who you're serving? If it works for you, that's completely fine, right? Like, yeah, if it helps the people you're serving, it doesn't need to support 10 million people before it's a very good idea. Your goal, you need to define what success is for you, and to just say, if with this idea I can support 100 people every year who can pay me $5,000 each, but it would change their life, that is a good idea, right? And then very simply ask 5 or 10 of the people that you want to serve if this idea is a good idea. You get it, and they will tell you, right? So, and you need to obviously start working on an idea a little bit to be able to articulate it well enough for other people to understand. Because usually, when you come up with an idea, you haven't really figured out how to tell somebody else about it, right? Because it's still kind of messy, and the value doesn't come out immediately. You share that, hey, I had this epiphany, blah 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 blah, and the person's like, well, that sounds just like a messy thing.
Hmm.
So I do think people should work on an idea for a couple weeks so that they can articulate it well enough, for it to have value. Then go ask the people you want to serve first if this is a good idea and this is value for them. Then you can go ask other people, other stakeholders, like people who might invest in it, a team that might work. You can ask those things, and if you get positive feedback regarding all of that, then go all out for that. Yeah.
And this is getting a bit into the nitty gritty, but
Hmm.
is that like cold outreach, or is it people in your circles like that are the ideal clients? Like, how do you go about that?
Good question. That's a good question, because usually the people who are in your immediate circles are not always your ideal target audience, right? But then,
Or they know you and they'll
also,
probably be kinder to you than they actually should be.
so what I usually encourage people to do is to do 2 to 3 degrees of separation. So ask people to recommend other people who are in your target group, who are a little less biased, to be able to give you feedback, right? So that way, cold outreach is a little tough because, not everyone is very busy now. And so, people are not giving as much attention to cold outreach as before. But if you can get a warm introduction through people, I think that's always a good sign. So start with your parents, for example, or start with your friends or your college mates, and they would recommend, and just make it very simple. Hey, can you refer 3 single mothers who are starting businesses, in your network? And then that you're trying to get about 30. So you need to ask 10 people in your immediate network to give you 3 references regarding that. And then that gets you where you're going. So just go 1 degree of separation or 2 degrees of separation, and you can get a good group, regarding that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what's been the most enjoyable part of your entrepreneurial journey so far?
Initially it was the smile of people who's so the first thing was, usually anytime someone comes up with an idea or a business, or even if the business is already running, they never really believe they can actually achieve success until they have like an actual brand or website. There's something that just picks up when you articulate their vision into like a company brochure or a website. So that was the first thing. But then now, what I enjoy the most, number one, is the fact that my brain is always spinning because I'm doing something that legitimately most people who've tried to do have failed. Most of the businesses who have launched design subscriptions at this scale have failed. The ones who are doing it well are usually one person teams, and they have a limited capacity of maybe tops 50 customers at a time, or they've been really big like Superside and they're taking on enterprise 1 year deals, right? But I'm trying to really solve very affordable, very scrappy, way of doing that and trying to keep that as a sustainable business. And therefore my mind is going crazy every day. And I really love that. And the second thing is my team initially and primarily is a team from Africa. I picked very junior people. And, some of them have been with me for 6 to 7 years. And to see that transformation and most of them didn't believe that this idea was anything serious, right? But they just believed that, hey, this guy's going somewhere. So I'm going to kind of go with him. But to see that transformation of moving from agency mindset into tech company mindset, from local mindset to global mindset, like that is a beautiful thing where you see that, so I'm really enjoying having them challenge me and innovate on ideas that I go like, I come up with a hypothesis and they go like, no, the data doesn't show this is what we propose, and I'm like, yo, whoa, like this is really cool, so I really enjoy that. Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I've gone blank on that question.
That's all good. All good. All
um,
good.
and what's been the hardest part of your entrepreneurial journey?
Well, I mean, it's been different phases of hard. So initially, the hardest part of my entrepreneurial journey was the fact that I didn't know I was a toxic entrepreneur. And so in the beginning, I used to exhibit lots of toxic traits in terms of like reaching out to people outside office hours, terminating, well, not terminating contracts in it, but like not going through the most kind way to terminate contracts, for example. Thinking high performance meant, just disregarding people's mental health, etc., etc. So not I operated for a couple of years having completely being oblivious to the fact that I was like a key cause of that. Then I learned about that and recognized, like, so that was just really difficult to navigate. I didn't know where to begin. I wasn't sure how much damage I had done. But and then obviously there's the basic stuff. We've been bootstrapping for a long time, so the capital issues and all of that stuff. But right now, the hardest part of my entrepreneurial journey is the fact that I am very much the first mover in this space and I need to have the patience and resilience to stick it through till the market gets, synced with what I'm selling, right? If I stop too early, I'm somebody else is just gonna come and pick it up, if you get what I mean.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and so you have to have the maturity to know that even though this is slow and it's taking a long time, we're not failing. We're actually doing very well, and we just need to stick it through. So it's kind of like what like people like Elon Musk have been dealing with. Everybody thinks they're crazy until they get it done, and that is very difficult even to communicate to like your family, right? Hey, like you're working 12-hour days on this idea that for a year and a half you haven't been able to make your first $1 million, for example, right? Like, when is this going to happen? Things like that, right?
yeah.
That's been quite difficult. Yeah.
I'm really fascinated by the toxic founder traits that you mentioned.
Yeah.
How did your ego handle like discovering that you had been running your business in a certain way?
I was a mess. I was a complete mess because that's the first thing. My self esteem was tied to, so first thing, my self esteem was tied to my productivity, and therefore my self esteem was tied to my being a good entrepreneur. Mainly because of how I started, I needed entrepreneurship to work out so that I could prove to my parents that I had made something of my life, right? Because it's almost like if when you rebel, it's almost like people are looking to see if you're gonna fail or not, because that way it just justifies whether you listened or you didn't, right? And I must say, my mom was a very big advocate for my entrepreneurial journey. My dad was a very big advocate for having secure careers for his kids. So none of that was bad, but like obviously, I subscribe to a slightly different way of thinking. So yeah, so when I had an anxiety about being a good entrepreneur, I needed it to happen. Whereas most people are kind of discovering it as it goes, right? So when I recognized after some time that actually I was a terrible, not I was a good entrepreneur, but a terrible leader and a boss. Yeah, that really broke me, and I think I lost myself for a long time, because I just wasn't even sure if I was good at anything, because I always needed external validation to help me figure out, hey, okay, maybe I'm okay at this, public speaking or things like that. And then that's where the pendulum swung all the way to the wrong side, where now I didn't take any internal validation. I needed everything to be externally validated. But now where I am at age 31, right, where I'm right in the middle, where I'm like, I'm completely happy. I'm confident that I'm a good person. But I also do like feedback so that I consistently stay humble. And so it's a good balance now. But back then it wrecked me when I found out, and I was like, why didn't anybody tell me for this long?
Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure. And once you sort of made that realization, how did you like try to reconcile the existing relationships, or did you make the people that you were managing aware that you now realize this? Like, I'm just
yeah.
fascinated by that.
It's very hard. I'm not gonna lie, because there's an element of people pleasing that we all suffer from, right? And so sometimes when you mess things up, so for example, let's say you terminated someone's contract, obviously on the right basis of low performance, but in the way that you terminated it, you weren't kind, right? So there's a part of you that sometimes feels like you need to make right with every single person. And sometimes that in itself is rooted in some kind of toxicity, because you want to be liked by everyone and you're just not comfortable with the idea that there's someone somewhere who just hates you, right?
Yeah.
But what I've tried to do now, I've just I by the Bible says, by their fruits you shall know them, right? So the idea is that by my fruit, by the things I put out into the world right now, the people who I've hurt in the past can see that, hey, this guy's kind of changed a little bit, and he talks openly on a podcast like this about the mistakes he's made, and whether they forgive me or not, that doesn't matter. But I think I can rest in the truth that they know that if the circumstances were this, if I was in the same circumstance, I'm treating them differently. So there's a good balance. I have apologized to some people and tried to build a good relationship, but I also do recognize that, I don't want to be a people pleaser. So there would be some relationships that I don't necessarily pursue. And also there's some people who also use it as an opportunity to stick it to you. So the fact that you were toxic to somebody else doesn't mean they're not toxic people themselves, right? So you can go and, reach out and say, hey, I want to have dinner or something like that, to have a conversation. And then that person spins that out, into a different story against you, and you get it. Like, it's quite
Yeah.
messy. So you just have to be cautious in terms of, you don't go too far. As long as you're a good person and you're trying to make right in the world, I think generally your waves of positivity will touch and fix some of the relationships from the past. That's what I
Yeah.
think.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And you touched on it a bit about balancing sort of personal life and social life and things like that. And I'm curious, how do you balance like family and social life and work?
I've done a terrible job of it for a very long time. So I think now, firstly, you need to understand what your North Star is. And most people are confused. They think their North Star is actually to be very, very wealthy and celebrated. But as a good human person, you need to do right by your family and social circles. So that's kind of more on obligation versus something that they genuinely want, right? So I would ask people to just have that conversation with yourself to determine what your North Star is. And for me, my North Star is to be a very good, well, a decent husband and a decent father, right? That is my North Star. And then to be able to leave an evergreen impact in the world, where I can, if when I die, that impact continues to, create more impact in its own. So those are kind of the three things that I've tried to kind of balance. And I've always struggled with the idea that those were two separate people. Sydney, the entrepreneur, and Sydney, the family person or friend, were two separate people. But if you recognize that it's all one entity, and therefore you have to manage all the resources evenly and accordingly. So, for example, time management, in my calendar has time with my wife, time with my wife and son, time with my son, and then time at work, time with friends. It's all there, time blocking. I remember I visited Ghana a couple of weeks ago, and then I sent a calendar invite to my friends, to say, hey, I have 1 week here and I want to spend time with one-on-one time with all 25 of you or 20 of you. Please book time in my calendar to be able to do that. Half of them insulted me. They thought I was an idiot. Who the hell do you think you are? You think you're some celebrity, like, that kind of thing. But for me, it's time. I'm being important about my friendly time, the time I spend with my friends. It has to go into my calendar. So that's just, so I treat it all as one, and try and allocate time accordingly. And then allocate time for myself, which is usually what struggles the most. So most of the time that I spend with myself is usually the sleep or in the shower. And I need to do better at solving time for just myself as well. But yeah, that's kind of the way I approach it. I don't approach it as two separate things or three separate things. I approach it as one thing that needs to be managed, accordingly. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
I'm not surprised your friends push back on that, but at the same time, it makes perfect sense. Like if you're a busy person, and it's in a way, it's kind of endearing. Like I am busy, but I'm making time for you. So
Exactly. That's what I
yeah,
say.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
where would you like to see Workspace Global in 5 years?
5 years. So 5 years, we're hoping to have done 100,000. Or we're hoping to have 100,000 paying subscribers, and then 25,000 talent that are hired and working in Africa. The beautiful thing about the talent is that they work flexibly and remotely, so they determine the hours when they want to work. It would be really nice to be able to empower 25,000 people to have that kind of flexibility, whether they're a mom, whether they're a student, they want to work at night, they want to work on weekends. We've actually branded it as the ultimate side gig. So that's the vision. I'm hoping to exit as CEO. I don't know if I want to do that in 5 years, but like the idea is like my family is my main priority, and OpenSpace, my nonprofit, is what I actually really enjoy. I just love creating stimulating conversation. So I hope to transition into that at some point. So I would like to hand off leadership to a team that can keep building this, and I'm hoping we can also support other emerging markets outside Africa. So South America is a very interesting market for us that I would like to also hire people from, Southeast Asia, and then just support the global north as well, regarding that. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm seeing it. There's a lot of other ideas that I wouldn't share too much, but we want to activate the model in other verticals as well. So it's not just the creative industry. We want to do this in the legal industry, the accounting industry. There's so many things we can do regarding that. Yeah, and then probably also franchise. There's a lot of things. It's huge. Like
Yeah.
basically creating this equation and model and just using that to support other spaces, industries, and ecosystems. And yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Mm.
And in terms of open space, like how frequently do you guys host events at the moment? How big are those events?
We need to do better. We need to do better because OpenSpace is currently in about 4 countries. So the UK, Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya. We need to expand it to the US, to Southern Africa, and basically any country in the world with professionals who want to have a conversation. We want to do that. Currently, we're having a conversation per quarter. But I deliberately did that because this year I wanted to slow down the number of things I was focusing on. And so previously we would have an event every month. But this year we brought the global community together to have one event a quarter. And then as we build, we're trying to look for funding partners, some donors. So hopefully next year we can expand the team and then probably have lots more conversations, out there, and probably also release a podcast. that could
Awesome.
be interesting. Yeah. So yeah.
Cool. And well, what kind of conversations do you guys have? What are the main sort of focal points?
Well, so we're saying conversations that make a wholesome human. So we talk about sometimes taboo social topics like how people are raised to adopt infidelity in their lives. For example, we've talked about clients from hell, and how entrepreneurs struggle with boundaries. We've talked about how childhood ruined my love life, things like that. So we pick very human topics in the sphere of work, career, fulfillment, purpose, even environment. Like it's all about making a wholesome human that is growing. And it's a peer-to-peer conversation. So the idea is that you're not coming to listen to an expert, you're coming to argue with 60 other people, who are all going to share their thoughts. And what most people walk away from is they build a lot of confidence in themselves, learn different perspectives, but it's such a great place to network by disagreeing with other people, so it's really, really cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is it like a speed dating approach, or how do you get everyone to converse?
So it's so there would be one or two moderators who have very well scripted questions and trigger points, and then there's 60 to 100 people sat in a semicircle, and then we have about 3 to 4 microphones that are floating in the crowd. So the moderator would prompt something, and it's very rapid. So it's like, if you can relate to this, put up your hand. So you say something ridiculous, right? Like, did your parents drop you before you were age 5? And maybe 10 people will raise up their hands, and then we throw it up, tell us a story really quickly about that, things like that. And then the mic just goes around really quickly, and people just share lots of rapid thoughts. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before I end every conversation, I ask my guests if they have a question for me.
Ooh. I'm gonna ask you a narcissistic question. What was your first impression when you started to do research about
My first impression was that you're a really successful entrepreneur that speaks really, really well. That's also something that came across in this conversation.
it?
It shows that you put in the reps because you deliver your thoughts and ideas and messages in easy to digest ways. Like when you break it up into 3 points or 2 points, or that's a very useful public speaking skill that not a lot of people have.
Mm,
Um, and so, yeah, that was my perception before, and it obviously carried through into this conversation. But I think it's really great to have a guest like you on the podcast, because it's when messages and advice is delivered in that digestible way, I feel like my episode is going to be more valuable to
mm,
listeners
mm, mm,
than if it's someone like who maybe on their first few podcasts that they've done. That's not to say the conversation isn't interesting, but the takeaways aren't as digestible as say our conversation has been. And so, yeah, it's a win. And so I really appreciate you joining me.
I appreciate that. I was thinking you might say, "Oh, he looks like a guy who's so full of himself," or like, So usually, I'm gunning for more negative feedback. So I'm really glad and really appreciative of what you just shared. So yeah,
Well, I work or we used to work in the personal branding game, so
right.
I'm very familiar with it. That's very like common to me. So I don't really doesn't really come across that way. I know the game. I know how it's played. So yeah, I'm used to that.
I appreciate it. Thanks so
Uh,
much, Byron.
well, yeah, thanks for joining me today, Sydney. If people want to find out more about you and Workspace Global or OpenSpace, where can they do so?
So Workspace Global is very easy. So workspaceglobal.com, very easy to find. Sydney Scott Sam, so it's at Sydney Scott Sam, Sydney with a Y, on all my channels. Those are the 2 key places you can find me. If you pop me a message on LinkedIn, I will spend 15 minutes with you. That's something that I've committed to. That I have an appointment link open for everyone for 15 minutes, and I will respond to your messages. And then OpenSpace is openSpaceGlobal.org. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, Sydney. Chat soon. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.